Imagine building your entire life around a promise that slowly disappears while you are still standing inside it, believing, trusting, waiting. What if the family you sacrificed everything for quietly rewrote the rules without you noticing? This is not just a story about land or marriage. This is the moment everything collapsed, the moment silence turned into strength, and the moment Kody Brown realized the women he underestimated were no longer waiting, and this time there was no turning back. Imagine devoting decades of your life to a promise that slowly dissolves while you are still standing inside it, believing, working, waiting. Imagine trusting a vision that was sold as unity while quietly being reshaped behind closed doors. This story begins long before the conflict ever surfaced, long before voices were raised or lines were drawn. It starts in the quiet moments when doubts were ignored and loyalty was mistaken for strength. Kody Brown once positioned himself as the leader of a united family, a man who spoke about togetherness, sacrifice, and shared dreams. But as years passed, the words stayed the same, while the actions shifted. And nowhere was that shift more visible than in the story of Coyote Pass, a piece of land meant to represent renewal, hope, and equality for the entire family. Instead, it became a mirror, reflecting imbalance, delay, and silent exclusion. Janelle Brown believed in that land. She invested in it financially, emotionally, and spiritually, trusting that the future promised to her would eventually take shape. She followed the rules, supported the moves, uprooted her life, and stood steady even when progress stalled, because she believed commitment would be rewarded. But time passed and the dream remained distant, while priorities elsewhere seemed clear and consistent. What viewers slowly realized was that Janelle was carrying the weight of patience, while others enjoyed the comfort of certainty. And as this imbalance deepened, conversations became harder, trust thinner, and reassurance less convincing. Kody spoke often about complications, about timing, about needing faith in the process. Yet that process never seemed to benefit everyone equally, and the longer Janelle waited, the clearer it became that silence was costing her more than speaking ever could. Meanwhile, Mary Brown existed in a parallel reality, one defined by hope deferred and connection stretched thin. Her relationship with Kody had faded long before the family acknowledged it, yet she remained, holding on to promises that change would come, that her place still mattered, that loyalty would eventually be seen. But loyalty without reciprocation slowly erodes into isolation, and while she stayed quiet, watching the family dynamic shift around her, the emotional distance only grew. Kody himself admitted that despite having no real relationship with Mary, he felt compelled to inform her about the property, not out of closeness, but out of conscience. And yet, even in that admission, there was contradiction. He expressed distrust, believing she might act against him, while openly acknowledging he once had similar thoughts. That moment revealed more than he intended. It showed a family operating without trust, without shared purpose, and without the emotional safety that once defined it as unity. And as these fractures widened, Janelle reached a turning point. She was no longer just uncomfortable, she was unsettled. She recognized that waiting had not protected her, that belief alone could not secure her future, and that the land she helped pay for might never truly be hers if she continued to rely on assurances rather than action. This realization did not come with anger, it came with clarity. She stopped asking when things would change and started asking why they had not. And that question changed everything, because once she saw the pattern, she could not unsee it. Resources flowed consistently in one direction, decisions were delayed selectively, and conversations about fairness were met with deflection rather than resolution. While she adjusted, downsized, and struggled to maintain stability, others lived with certainty and comfort. And when she finally voiced these concerns, she was met not with solutions, but with explanations that required more patience, the same patience she she had already given for years. And this was the moment the story quietly shifted, because Janelle was no longer seeking permission, she was seeking accountability. She began prioritizing herself, not out of resentment, but out of necessity. She stopped engaging in circular discussions and started thinking strategically, emotionally, and practically, understanding that protecting her future required boundaries, not endurance. And as she took these steps, the balance of power began to change. Kody, who had long relied on compliance, found himself facing resistance, not loud, not chaotic, but firm and grounded. He framed himself as misunderstood, as overwhelmed, as carrying the burden of leadership. Yet the narrative was no longer fully his to control. Viewers could see the contrast between words and outcomes, and that contrast grew sharper with every episode. This was no longer a story about family complexity. It was about what happens when loyalty is not met with fairness. And as Janelle asserted her claim to what she had invested in, the response was not immediate, but the pressure built. Legal realities replaced vague plans, and eventually the situation reached a point where it could no longer be delayed. The return of the property deed marked more than a financial correction. It symbolized a shift in agency. It was tangible proof that persistence, grounded in self-respect, can change outcomes. And this moment rippled through the family dynamic because it showed that standing firm could lead to resolution, something Mary had waited years to see. Watching Janelle succeed where patience alone had failed forced a quiet reckoning. Mary had spent years hoping for emotional restoration, believing that staying would eventually bring clarity. But clarity arrived in a different form, through observation. She saw what happened when someone stopped waiting and started choosing themselves. And that realization planted a seed, one that would later grow into her own decision to step away. The structure that once revolved around Kody was slowly unraveling, not through conflict, but through awareness. Christine had already chosen independence, Janelle had chosen protection, and Mary was beginning to choose herself. And at the center stood a man confronting the reality that authority without balance cannot endure. The story of Coyote Pass became the story of a family redefining power, trust, and self-worth. And as the first chapter closes, one thing becomes clear. This was never just about land. It was about the moment people stopped sacrificing their future for promises that remain unfulfilled, and the consequences that follow when those promises are finally questioned. As the consequences of that shift settled in, the family dynamic continued to evolve in ways that could no longer be ignored. The moment Janelle asserted her claim did not end the conflict. It exposed everything that had been buried beneath years of compromise. What followed was not explosive confrontation, but a slow unraveling of illusions. Kody, who had long positioned himself as the center of decision-making, struggled to adapt to a reality where his authority was being questioned, not emotionally, but structurally. He continued to frame the situation as complicated, emphasizing shared responsibility and financial strain. Yet those explanations rang hollow when compared to the lived experiences of the women who had waited patiently for years while progress remained stalled. And this contrast became impossible to dismiss. Viewers could see that the issue was not confusion, it was prioritization. And once that truth became visible, the narrative shifted permanently. Janelle was no longer seen as compliant or passive. She was seen as measured, strategic, and grounded. She did not rush to leave. She did not seek public sympathy. She focused on securing what she had contributed, and that quiet resolve reshaped how her story was understood. While Kody spoke about loyalty and family structure, Janelle demonstrated accountability and follow-through. And that distinction mattered because it showed that stability does not come from endurance alone. It comes from mutual respect and fairness. Meanwhile, Mary continued her own internal reckoning. Watching the situation unfold forced her to confront years of emotional stagnation. She had remained hopeful, believing that persistence would eventually restore connection. But watching Janelle achieve resolution through boundaries highlighted what patience without reciprocity had cost her. Mary had spent years existing on the margins, holding on to a role that no longer offered fulfillment. And while she did not immediately act, the shift was unmistakable. She began to disengage emotionally, reclaiming space that had long been occupied by uncertainty. And this gradual withdrawal marked the beginning of her own transformation. She stopped centering her choices around the possibility of reconciliation and started considering what peace might look like independently. And that internal change carried weight because it signaled the end of a cycle that had defined much of the family history. Christine had already demonstrated what life could look like beyond waiting. Her departure had been decisive and rooted in self-worth rather than conflict. And together, these individual choices formed a pattern that could not be dismissed. 3 women, each reaching clarity through different paths, but arriving at the same conclusion, that fulfillment could not be built on imbalance. Kody found himself increasingly isolated, not because of abandonment, but because the structure he relied on no longer existed. Unquestioned authority without accountability no longer worked. Real held, and as the family landscape changed, public perception shifted as well. Viewers who once viewed the family through the lens of tradition began to see the cost of sustaining a system without equity. Conversations once dominated by justification were now replaced with reflection. The focus moved away from defending choices toward examining outcomes, and that examination revealed a consistent theme. When voices are minimized, trust erodes, and when trust erodes, unity collapses. Kody continued to speak about intention, emphasizing that harm was never deliberate, yet intention could not outweigh impact, and that distinction became central to the unfolding story. The women were no longer asking for acknowledgments of effort, they were asking for acknowledgments of consequence, and that request required accountability, something that had long been deferred. The reality was that leadership without listening creates distance, and distance eventually becomes separation. And as this truth settled in, the future of the family took on a different shape, no longer defined by collective endurance, but by individual clarity. Janelle focused on building stability on her own terms, prioritizing financial independence and emotional health. Christine embraced a new chapter grounded in joy and self-expression. Mary continued redefining her identity beyond the role she had held for decades, and Kody faced the challenge of reconciling his self-image with the outcomes of his decisions. The story no longer centered on maintaining appearances, it centered on growth, accountability, and the courage to choose oneself. And as the dust continued to settle, one thing became undeniable. This was not a sudden collapse. It was the result of years of unmet needs, deferred conversations, and unequal investment. And while the future remained uncertain, the present held clarity. The era of silent endurance had ended, replaced by intentional choice. And that shift ensured that the story would not be remembered for its breakdown, but for the moment those involved reclaimed their agency and redefined what strength truly meant. In the end, this was never about property or titles. It was about people choosing themselves after years of waiting. Janelle claimed her future, Christine reclaimed her joy, Mary found her clarity, and the power once held by one voice disappeared the moment others stopped staying silent. This chapter may be closing, but the impact remains, because when truth finally replaces patience, everything changes, and there is no going back.